I'd stand up right at the start of the line, drawing circles. Well, I drink my whiskey, you sip your wine. We're doing well, sitting watching the world falling down its decline. And I can keep you safe, I can keep you safe. Do not be afraid, do not be afraid. You're feeling sorry, I'm feeling fine. Don't you put any more stress on yourself, it's one day at a time. Getting pretty late, getting pretty late. Yeah, and I found it goes around like the ends. I keep counting the time, drawing circles.
surrounded by green, but I need more for my kin and more for my team. I was dance to a different type beat, off kilter rhythm, took the traces of my feet, but I need more before I dip out of the scene. For my niggas, for my queens, for the babies, for my rounds, for my sisters missing crowns, homies victims to apathy, like honey dripping off the table in front of me. Feet say go, but my heart still fights for the seed. They buy souls, but my soul sent back the deed. Oh, why? So you get rich, I'ma try to get free. Not exclusive mutually, but I gotta find the balance between.
Some say life is just ahead, and it's here we dwell until we're truly free. Some say projects and ghettos and seeds that will never grow. All there is to see. I'll stay with you through the night, and in the darkest times, we'll fight through it all until we reach that dawn. I dream of a world where love is the rule, where hearts walk two by two, and I with you. I dream of a place where a child's wish can always come true, and the old and weather become renewed.
Molly, you're muted.
Dang it. All right, let me try that again. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are really excited to have everyone. My name is Molly. I'm an executive fellow for the Everett program, where I manage the Gateways project. Gateways is a team of undergraduate students plugged into local community groups and projects to support those impacted by mass incarceration. We teach digital storytelling and design both inside county jails and in our own classes online. We also organize quarterly events to bring conversations about mass incarceration to our community. This year, we're also a part of the Stop San Quentin Outbreak Coalition, which organizes against the devastating COVID-19 outbreaks across CDCR. The coalition is supporting an ongoing action called 100 Days of Freedom to put pressure at the local and state level to ensure immigrants are not funneled into ICE custody after they complete their CDCR sentence. This week, we're sharing the story of Gabriela Solano, an incarcerated survivor of domestic violence who will face an ICE transfer on her first day of freedom unless Governor Newsom intervenes within the next 2 weeks. If you'd like to take a few minutes to advocate yourself and amplify Gabriela's campaign, please visit the link in our chat. And from everyone on the Gateways team, we're really excited to welcome you into the conversation today and hope you'll join us for the rest of Reimagine Everything. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Awassa-speaking Yupi tribe. The Amamutsan tribal band, comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to the mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore the traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. Now I'd like to welcome our moderator, Phoenix, for today, Phoenix, to introduce our speakers.
Hi, thank you, Mo. My name is Phoenix. I am a sociology major at UCSC. I have a concentration in global information and social enterprise studies, and I'm currently in my third year. I'm also an Everett program student. I'm working on the Gateway student team, and we are the most recent addition to Gateways. So I'm super excited to be here moderating our second session of the winter webinar series, Reimagine Everything. Today, we're speaking with Professor Anjuli Verma and Adamu Chan on ways to move from theory to praxis. Dr. Anjuli Verma is a professor of legal studies at UC Santa Cruz, and Adamu Chan is a filmmaker, artist, poet, and activist from the Bay Area. So I'd love to have you both introduce yourself further and tell us a little bit about your background in community accountability and organizing.
You want me to start?
Yes, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Adamu Chan, and like you, I appreciate the way you introduced me. That's what I identify with. I'm a filmmaker, writer, but I was also incarcerated for the last 13 years inside of California prisons, and I was recently released about 4 months ago. And over the last year, I've been involved with organizing with the Stop the San Quentin Outbreak Coalition, both on the inside and since I've been home. And that's how I met Molly and you folks. And yeah, I really appreciate y'all inviting me here today. And I hope this conversation is generative, and I hope it's helpful for folks. So thank you.
We're so glad that you're here with us, Adamu, and we're like so privileged that you're spending your time with us. And hopefully it'll be kind of celebratory, perhaps. So I'm Anjuli Verma. I'm a politics professor, and I teach in the legal studies program here at UC Santa Cruz. My background is I have a PhD in criminology, law, and society. But that is sort of can be a misspecification for what I do and sort of what drives my research and my work in my life. Criminologists generally study crime, and they're interested in explaining why people commit crime and how to prevent crime. But what criminologists don't do is actually deconstruct or question crime as a category and criminalization as a process. So in an odd way, in order to actually study crime as a category of power and oppression, you have to step outside, right, of criminology. And that's why I'm in a politics department. And I guess I would say that, you know, the object of my research is punishment. So I don't study why people commit crime and how to prevent it. I study why we criminalize what we do and why we punish the way that we do. And I'm really interested in the question of whether we can have justice without punishment in this society. And prior to getting my PhD, I worked at the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, for 7 years, first in their drug policy litigation project and drug law reform project, and then in their overall criminal law and criminal justice reform program area. And I started at the ACLU because I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. But as it turns out, my job was way more interesting than the lawyers' jobs. I got to do community organizing, media relations, strategic communication, and public opinion research on all of the issues that are near and dear to my heart. So I look forward to participating in the conversation today, and thanks everyone for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. I have my first question is for Adamu. And I know that transformative justice, has been around for a really long time, but it's recently started entering more mainstream conversations. And sometimes to some people, it can seem like a list of really theoretical approaches to problems, but we know that in reality, many communities have been practicing transformative justice, daily without even realizing it. So can you talk about some of the ways you've maybe seen community care or accountability take place on that more everyday basis?
Yeah, thank you, Phoenix, and thank you, Anjuli, too, Yeah, I think so. I wanted to, I think, comment on a piece about a piece of your question that I noticed, and it was around like communities practicing transformative justice every day without realizing it. I think that like one thing that I've been thinking about is like when things become mainstreamed, they become like legitimized for the public. And I just want to say that like I think these practices have been like that have recently entered the public consciousness, like have been developed over decades by like mostly like women of color and like non-binary folks that have been doing this like just to survive in their communities. Um, and so like I just want to like as a clarification, I think that these things have been around for a long time, which is what you said also, but um, I think that it's actually the other way around, that like people have been doing the work of transforming like the conditions of their like shared realities, um, and that like people are starting to realize like within this framework that that's actually what they've been doing. Um, and so like I think like one thing that like comes up for me is like I think about like the legacy of like Black music and arts like as a mode of like communication and expression and resilience, and that it has like a clear lineage to like ancestors and involves like mentorship and collaboration, and offers like healing to people and refuge and dignity, um, um, and not just to Black folks, but to folks across the board, and that like that process of creating something like out of kind of um, you know, some of the like horrors of the Black experience in this country, like is transformative. And I think that like, that's just like something that I'm thinking about. So like back to your question about like things that I've experienced in my life, and like in my experience, I think like in the last several years, inside of prisons, kind of like the landscape of, prison programming has included like a lot of like restorative justice like programming and like groups, um, and I think in a lot of ways like the state has like co-opted like restorative justice, and I think that it's the same out here. Like it's become uh like required like in schools, and like the same in the same way it's become like mandated by the state for people on the inside who are serving life sentences to gain their release, right? Like you have to go through a restorative justice program, um and so I think that like that in itself is like a limitation on restorative justice, and also like the ways in which I think that like the state requires like a certain type of accountability, which says that um like I'm a bad person and I'm apologizing for being a bad person, and I am engaging in a process that moves me from a bad person into like a more respectable type of person, right? um and I think in a lot of ways that is can be very harmful. And so like I bring up this example because um, I was part of a group of people that there was about 5 of us that came together um, and worked on a curriculum in 2018 and 2019 for about 8 months, where I think we collectively decided that like a lot of what was happening in like these restorative justice programs um, wasn't was first of all like harmful, and then and two was like limiting kind of it wasn't specific to our experience. And I think that like, I've seen a lot of good things that have come out of these restorative justice programs. Like, I think there is a lot of like accountability that happens. There's a lot of orienting people towards like healing. And there have been like, there is a lot of amends that happens between like people who have you know, caused harm to people and survivors. Those conversations do happen. But I think that like we all felt like there was something more that we could get out of this, right? Outside of the I guess like outside of the like the interference of the state, right? And outside of kind of a lot of like nonprofits that were coming into the prison to run these programs, right? Like there were things that we could do on our own. And so you know, the small group of us decided to come up with a curriculum that called Prevail, that was centered the African American experience, and was about kind of asking the question about like how we all got to this point, like how we had ended up in the circumstances that we had ended up in. And instead of an approach that said that like you were bad and and that's why you're here, like we wanted to like zoom out and focus on like the historical context of what it meant to be Black in this country, right? And so also like that also involved like folks being in a conversation with their parents and with and understanding understanding like where like practices had come from experiences of trauma and historical experiences of trauma, and also like providing a space where people could talk about their trauma in ways that wasn't that didn't feel like it was I guess being surveilled by outside folks, or that they were having to do this in a way that meant that at the end they would get a certificate or something like that. And I think the other thing too is like within that context, I think that like we were all able to like share our experiences and also like work on building like our relationship with each other and our relationships inside of the community of that group. And I think that like a lot of folks had you know, not had experiences with like relationships that were like non-transactional, or where you know, the imbalance of power was like so great that like it didn't feel equitable, right? And so I think that like that was another thing that like we were definitely trying to work on in that space, was about trying to understand like the context of how we had reached this point, but also like moving forward into trying to kind of build things that like are just fundamental to like social living, right? And understanding that like we need each other, and that like there is a process to building relationships and community that I think is like intuitive and like, and that we all understand, but like that maybe we need to like relearn them in certain ways, right? Yeah, so I think that that's one example. I think the other example is, for me, is like has to do with a lot of the media work that I have been involved with on the inside. And I think you know, like with media, and like I think I was able to recognize the power, the transformative power of like having a platform for folks to like amplify their stories and amplify voices. um and yeah, like through that process, like I feel like that was like transformational too, you know, for folks like to be able to um to see themselves like represented in ways um, that weren't um, like limiting of their humanity and their dignity. So I think that those are two ways that I can think of right now.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of amazing stuff in what you said, and especially, you know, talking about the Black art in the media. Um, of course, it's a really transformative um, approach, but I think that we've seen, you know, that taken in a different direction. So I have a question for Dr. Verma in that direction. So we've seen, you know, over the past few decades, instances of like mass violence in communities becoming really hyper visible, you know, on television and social media. And we see a lot of concentrated energy around these movements that encourage change, but they often, you know, die down after a while and the cycle begins to repeat itself. But how can people act towards justice and equitable change in their daily lives rather than in those cycles of media reaction?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think that for a lot of us who've, okay, so let me start with this. Someone in graduate school, a fairly famous chronologist, during my first year remarked, you know, because I was the person that was interested in ending mass incarceration. And she said, "Oh, mass incarceration is the new kale." And I said back to her, I was like, "Yeah, well, I was eating kale before kale was a thing." But like, I think that there's a sort of even deeper, like way before 2020, and the kind of eruption of white attention and white eyes on this. Even, you know, people who have been critiquing the rise of the prison state as it was happening in the 80s and 90s, you know, were relatively obscured. And I even see sort of in the scholar academic research industrial complex that it all of a sudden became like really sexy to be a mass incarceration scholar. And there's something about that that's it seems connected to me to what Adamu was saying about kind of the ability to have a platform where people who are being affected directly by incarceration can speak for themselves without it becoming this like weird pornography, right? Where it's like it's essentializing, it's a spectacle, all of that. And so I think that I think the answer to this question about how to get beyond these like cycles of kind of like performative caring and performative reaction, and then we just kind of go back to the way things were, is it's a really deep psychoanalytic problem that this country has, which is that it's not willing to go to the navel of its dream. And it's like, I think people have been really really empowered by what's been happening in the past year, where we're actually having a conversation mainstream about defunding the police and abolition. But the problem is that, you know, if you're really going to go there, you've got to deconstruct the question of abolish what. And then we have to have a conversation about, well, we can abolish the prison, but then we're still going to have a world with economic precarity, with dehumanization. And so what would the object be? That what is the policy solution to end all of that? And I think people get locked into this policy debate about changing laws, changing policies. And if this pandemic hasn't already ground each and every one of us down, who are not used to spending all of their time in one room, it's done something to make us actually force ourselves to go deep. It's like our lives, and this is what happens, you know, Adamu could probably speak to this much better than me, but from the people that I know and love who have been incarcerated and are incarcerated, what I see is that their lives become smaller, but deeper, way deeper. So it's like we're all out in the world having this breadth of experience, but on a really thin veneer of care and self-care. And when you have constraints, whether it's chronic pain or a pandemic or imprisonment, you have to go really deep into that one place that you are. And that's hard work. And this country has to do a version of that. It's like this country has to basically look at what it's done to itself and grapple with that in a way that's not about policy. And so I think, you know, it's strange to be at this point kind of in my career and sort of saying, well, I'm not talking about law. I'm not talking about policy. I'm talking about my racist uncle who, like, I need to stop just like letting him say the stuff that he's saying. This past election, I'm from Alabama. And I'm half white, and the whole half of my, you know, white side of my family voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And, you know, the way that I've survived my Alabama experience is like to not talk about politics with them. But this time it just felt so existential, you know, and I was like, look, like our whole like relationship is on the line around this. You know, and I think that kind of personal stakes, putting your personal relationships up to the light of critique. Like if everyone spent as much time thinking about the way that they extract and exchange and objectify and dehumanize the people in their lives, the people they work with, the people that work for them, that clean their house, that deliver DoorDash, like all of it, right? If people spent that much time, you know, self-examining that on a daily basis as they do watching people get shot, watching Black people die on Twitter, then I think we would be in a better situation. So that's my tentative answer. And I guess one thing, if you don't mind me, I really just had a reaction to Adamu's comments about the co-optation of restorative justice by the state. Sort of the idea of restorative justice, that it had this kind of emancipatory possibility, but it's the same thing of like, you know, the California Department of Corrections in whatever year added the word rehabilitation to its name so that it's CDCR. The R is definitely silent, but not silent in the sense that it's co-opted this whole rehabilitation, sort of rehabilitation industrial complex, right? And it's a perfect example of how you can make some changes that maybe began as these like radical pivots, but they always get recirculated back into what I think is the fundamental evil of our criminal justice system. And it's the thing that is the object of abolitions. What we need to abolish is the idea that there's this binary relationship between a perpetrator and a victim, and that there's not at least another entity in that formula, which is the community and the state that has put people in situations. And so getting past the like victim perpetrator binary, that's about abolishing a kind of relation. And it's about putting all of us, the community, into the picture and saying, well, what responsibility does this community bear for the life history that each of these people have had, who in this snapshot of a moment, you see a perpetrator of a crime and a victim of that crime, but all the things that brought them to that particular moment, we need to start looking at the fact that we're all part of that too. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much. This all comes down to very like personal and almost intimate concerns. And I think that's a really interesting discussion when it comes to community care. And that's actually my next question for Adamu is like, how do we make community care both accessible and like desirable to everyday people when the society that we kind of live in is based around individualism? Is that something that you see happening, and how can we do that?
Yeah, thank you, Phoenix. Yeah, that's a great question. And I also wanted to like respond to a couple of things that Anjuli said, or just add, I guess, which is the last thing that you said about binaries, I think is like a really important question. And it's an important issue that I feel like folks need to wrap their head around, because I think like in my experience, like 100% of folks that I was incarcerated with at some point in their life were a survivor of some type of abuse or some type of violence. And like to think about like that their first experience with violence was not like them causing the violence or them causing the harm. It was them being a victim, essentially, right? And that like all of those people have an experience where they never received justice for the abuse or harm that was done against them, right? And that I think that we need to start thinking about like what that does to a person, right? Like what happens when a person doesn't receive justice for the things that have happened to them, right?
Or protection.
Right. And just like you said, like that is a community problem, right? That's a problem that we all participate in, right? And then I think the other thing that you were talking about policy changes, right? And specifically about like how the state and the Department of Corrections kind of like is able to like absorb into its mission and into its body like these things that seem like they are positioned against it, right? And I've written about this recently, which is that like the carceral system is built on reform, right? It's built on this idea of progressive reform. It's built on this idea that like what we have now is better than what we had 100 years ago or 200 years ago when we were, executing people or whatever, crucifying them or whatever we were doing, right? And like in the same way, that is what like makes the system like so durable, right? Is that it's able to like absorb these reforms, right? And that like makes like policy reform limited in certain ways, right? Like we can only attack the system like in these kind of like really like limited kind of ways, right? And so like I would say that, and part of this is because like I consider myself an artist, but I think that like it's important that we engage like artists and people who are creative, like in the creative parts of ourselves, to think about like ways in which like, you know, we can shift culture, right? And we can shift like the way that people think about things. Because like when people say like we need to shift money from the police to like community care or whatever, or to mental health services or whatever, like the system is not designed to do that. It's not at its core designed to like care for people, right? In that way. And so like I think like our job as like abolitionists or people who want to see like a better world is like to think about like how we can begin to like shift culture, right? And shift the way that like people think about things, like how they perceive themselves and others, and how they view community, how they view their relationships. And so I think like this goes into your question, which is like, how do we make community care accessible and irresistible? I think like I said before, that like these things are in some way like intuitive for us, right? Like there are things about community care and living communally that is reminiscent to us, even if we have come from situations where like those things are not like present in our lives, right? Or have been like harmful to us or traumatic to us, right? But like I know that most people have had like a situation where they've had like a really strong friendship, or they grew up in a family that cared for them, or have had an experience with like team sports even, right? Like there's a reason why we live in cities, like why we live together, why we form units. It's because like at the core of us, like we understand that like living in this way like benefits us, right? And also benefits the whole. And so I think in like I don't think that there's like necessarily like one answer to this question, but it's just that like it's just thinking about like how we can try to navigate power and how it operates in our relationships, to like better live together, right? More equitably. And I think that that's like obvious in some ways and maybe like feels redundant, but it's also like not something that like we are existing in at this moment. And so like it needs to be reiterated, and it needs to be like internalized. Yeah, and so that I think that would be what my answer would be to that question.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think that's really interesting that it's like, it's not, you know, this capitalist system that we live in that is natural. That's kind of, you know, what's being forced on us. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting thought. I'm wondering, Dr. Verma, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Just to say that, you know, I think that what we're talking about here is just recovering the possibility to have solidarity, and that's not only helping. That's not only about kind of coming to the realization that we need each other, and I guess virally, that in a self-interested way, if one of us has a health problem or gets a virus, that it's a risk, right, to all of us. But I think there's also a dimension that hasn't been maybe excavated enough, which is that we can help each other. And we don't always need the state around to do that. And the idea that we need the state to keep us safe is the first problem with policing. And every society has a system for social control. Every society has, what amount to laws and punishments. But the state in sort of late capitalism, in this like racial capitalist state, the whole structure of just that we look up for protection as opposed to next door and like to our neighbors. And the thing about what kind of society that has wrought for us is that the places that are dismissed as the most dangerous places in this country, where crime is the highest, those are the places where people have never depended on the state for safety. And like Adamu says, it's like they've been surviving because they help each other in a system that doesn't want them to survive. And so I think that white people in this country are not used to having to survive when the society doesn't want them to. And so there's been radical care and solidarity going on a long time. And I think we can build on that fact, just that social fact, that this is not actually some like revolutionary thing. It's actually what human beings have been doing for a very long time. And it's just about recognizing the perversion that we haven't all been doing it.
Yeah, I am wondering, you're talking about building, that community care, and like within the university setting, I'm wondering if you have any ideas for building that abolitionist community care mindset in this really institutionalized setting. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on that. And I've been, there are two things that I have been really grappling with since I got to UCSC. The first began with the graduate student cost of living adjustment strikes back in winter 2020. And I think what happened with that strike to me that was potentially transformative, outside of whether the graduate students will get a COLA, or outside of the policy question, okay, for a moment, was that this university revealed itself to itself in the sense that what was made explicit was that our graduate students are at once students and teachers and employees. And the university was essentially asked whether it was a firm, like an employer, right? And sort of like existing as this like corporate entity that can make demands on its wage laborers, or if it's a public educational institution. And every single one of us who are faculty had to basically confront and then be explicit. Are our graduate students just employees? Or like, why are they here? Aren't they here to learn? Isn't our relationship with them first as teacher student, not employee corporation? So I think that as the UC wide deals with the ongoing labor unrest and what will probably be more and more strikes, I think that we need to stop talking about a lot of things and just start talking about that. Like, what is the relation? Like, what is the existential like identity of the people in this institution, and what is this institution actually here for? To educate or to employ? And then again, to break down the binary, that it can't be both. It can be both. But if, you can't have it both ways. It's like, if you really want to educate students and employ them, then we have to face the contradictions inherent in that. And I think we can figure that out if we're willing to actually, name the contradiction. And then the second thing I'll say, and this is wrapped up with my kind of critical stance within criminology, is that I've really sort of come to this moment where I think about kind of my identity as this like person that is supposed to be producing knowledge, and whether I like it or not, whatever knowledge I produce, stands to potentially get utilized as expertise, right? And I think that like my job right now as a researcher in this area is actually not to answer a lot of questions, but to actually pose questions differently or new questions. So I'm more interested now, I think, in like, what is the role of like education, higher education? Like, what is it that what are the learning objectives for my students? And rather than having them answer a question that I pose correctly, actually the learning objective is for them to pose a question better or a different question. So I think that we keep circling around in all of these areas, a problem that we can't really name always. And then we that's part of how we get in the loop of reform, right? Like the problem is the prison on its face, but it's actually all of the things that allowed us to have something called a prison, right? So I think the radical pedagogy piece is part of, my answer to what this has to do with the university. And also like what kind of knowledge counts in this moment. And a lot of it is, I think, posing a question, and in a sense, as soon as you pose a question, it kind of becomes a political claim. Like just saying, is this a homicide or is it a murder? Right? Like when we say police killing, oh, do you mean police killing a civilian or do you mean civilian killing a police? Just actually getting really specific and posing questions that become claims.
Right. I think, yeah, the grad students situation really, placed our university in like a special place of being able to question those things, which, has led to some amazing conversations. But Adamu, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on any of that.
Yeah, that was a bunch of great points, Anjuli, that I feel like really resonated with me. Back in July, when I was inside of San Quentin, I joined an ethnic studies class at UC Berkeley to like engage in a conversation like this, but I was on the inside and joining through a phone call. And I think like at that time, like I was thinking about kind of the parallels between the prison and the university, and that they're both, founded on exclusion of certain people in different ways, of course. And just like you said, like, the university makes these claims to knowledge knowledge production and like knowledge ownership. And like when we're talking about transformative justice, and like the ways in which people have been surviving, and that these are like keys to like our health as a society, like these things are happening like outside of the university, right? And so like they are not under the ownership of the university, right? And I think that like as students and as people who like exist inside of the university, like I think it's a great point what you said about like expertise, right? Which is that like all knowledge production doesn't happen inside of the university. And that I think that it's, you know, as abolitionists, like we want to abolish the prison, but we also want to abolish like the ways in which like our institutions like are functioning in our society in ways that are like harmful, including the university, right? And that's not like calling out UCSC or any university, but just that like that's something that we need to be also like in the process of investigating, right? And so I think like, you know, like one of the questions that like the professor asked me at that time back in July was if I felt like the activist home was in the university. And I think I don't think that the activist home is in the university. The activist home is in the community. The activist is working to dismantle the institution, right? And so I think that that's like, I feel like that's a good framework for which like we can look at like how we approach like our involvement in the university and like how like we approach like our work in general, right? That it happens outside of the university, but that like we also use the university as a platform or as resources. And I think that like as abolitionists, like it's important to like be having these conversations because like we do exist within systems and we do exist within within institutions. And there's no way that we can like completely get outside of them. So yeah, that's what I would add to that.
Can I add something briefly or respond briefly?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been thinking a lot about institutions and sort of like what is an institution? And I think when we say institution, we often mean state institutions, but there are all kinds of other institutions, right? There's religion, there's marriage, there's, I mean, you know, I think that again, to kind of just be really precise about it, I think the problem of institutions is not that they're institutions or that certain patterns of behavior or relationships become institutionalized, but it's actually that we're not asking our institutions to do the things that they ought to be doing. It's kind of like, what are our institutions for, and for whom do they exist, and what is their purpose? And that kind of interrogation, you know, for me has led to me thinking about, you know, despite all the critiques I have about the university, that this institution is a resource, right? And that all institutions, no matter how rotten they might be. I mean, even the prison, right, is a resource. I mean, even the prison is a place, right, where people organize and heal and become politicized. And that doesn't mean that that's all it is, but the political maneuver is, no matter where you are, to find a way to use resources that are there. And I think that, you know, the University of California and the master plan that was passed in 1960, if you read that document, it's a really visionary statement of principles that its pillars are that this state wants to offer higher education to any person in the state who wanted it, and that higher education would be accessible, it would be affordable, and that there would be maximum transferability, so that no matter kind of where you started, if you didn't go to a great high school or you got a GED or whatever, you start in like one tier, and there should be maximum transferability so that everyone could graduate from the UC if they want to. And the fact that it is an exclusionary institution, that's a historically contingent empirical fact, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that the resource of, so many institutions say what their mission is, but of course don't live up to that. But the politics is to actually use that statement of principles to make a claim. And I feel that way about the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence. Teaching about like American political development, if you just start with the Declaration of Independence and say America's great, that's not the way to use that resource. The way to use that resource is to name the hypocrisy of that document coming after, this white settler colonial genocide, and then chattel slavery that came after it, and the legacies that we live in today, to say we're all a bunch of hypocrites. And I'm making a claim based on this original document of what America said it would be. And so in that way, like, I have a kind of radical sense of hope, even in these times where I do believe in the American dream. I believe in the California dream. And even though the people who had the first American dream, that dream for them was about exterminating and eliminating non-white people. That was their dream, but it wasn't mine. And I get to use the fact that there is an American dream to repopulate what that dream is. And we can do that at the university. And we should do that.
Right. Thank you so much for that. I mean, it's a really interesting proposition to say, the American dream is still valid and we can change it. But I appreciate everything you guys have said. And thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. This was an amazing discussion. I'm really happy we got to hear your thoughts. But I do want to open up a discussion in the chat. And if anyone has any thoughts, I'm sure a lot of people do, because this is a really interesting discussion. So you can feel free to turn your camera on, pop something in the chat, or just jump in. I would love to hear some thoughts from some people. Yeah, Sierra, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, Anjuli. It's good to see you. It's been a little while.
Where are you? Oh, there. Okay.
Okay, so I had a question. You had mentioned about restorative justice or transformative justice being co-opted by the state and kind of institutionalized and losing its, I'm assuming losing its value in that way. And so I guess I'm just curious what, I don't know, like how to, like, I like this idea of just starting questions and dialogue, but I'm curious if you think that there are ways to, I don't know, move forward or have restorative justice or transformative justice program that is developed like with the state and still effective in the meantime. You know what I mean? Like, what are the next steps, kind of thing, in your opinion?
So I confess I don't have an answer to that, but I have a maybe something to inject in how we might arrive right at some answers to that. So the question about, restorative justice, transformative justice, criminal justice, in the context of the Capitol riot in January has really inverted. I think it's always helpful to kind of invert the argument to kind of figure out kind of like what's really at stake here. And so I've been thinking a lot about, and I'll just say this, I mean, and no one has to agree with me. This is just my own opinion, I guess. It's not based on any research. This is a normative statement that I'm about to make. Okay, so full disclosure. I think that the people who stormed the Capitol should be punished. And I think that that's what punishment is for. And it's not because they're bad people. And it's not that I wish to dehumanize them or make them suffer, but it's because what punishment does is it expresses what the values of the society are. And the values that we've been expressing in an age of mass incarceration are not values that any of us should be proud of. But when we have white supremacists trying to take over the Capitol and don't punish them in the context of having punished so harshly for so long in an age of mass incarceration, not to mention the more current event, punishment of Antifa in the first inauguration, and then Black Lives Matter protesters. I mean, in a more meta-historical sense, that punishment can serve justice. And sometimes I think that there is a situation where justice cannot be done without punishment. And so I think that a transformative way of thinking about this is in every instance that there is a perpetration of interpersonal violence or interpersonal theft or whatever. The question we need to ask is not how to punish, but can justice be done here without punishment? And that automatically takes us into a conversation that's along the lines of Adamu's describing, like, well, how did we get here? Right? Like, so why did it happen? Why did you steal this thing? Or why, what's going on with these two people? That's just different, right? Like, to ask the question, can justice be done without punishment here? Is a pivot that would make a big difference. Yeah. I know not everyone's going to agree with me that the rioters need to be punished, but
I am curious if you would agree with that, Adamu, and then I have a couple chat questions. But yeah, would you agree with that, Adamu?
I think I'm curious to know what Professor, like what you would like propose as punishment. Like I don't believe in prisons. I don't believe in that form of punishment. I don't believe that so I think, for me, I also worry about like what I think is like a slippery slope, in that once we start going down that road of like saying that we should punish these people because these people have been punished, I feel like we can get into a little bit of trouble with that. And I think that like I'm not about advocating for empathy for people who believe in white supremacist ideology. But I also feel like just as in the situation where I believe that everyone that commits violence, like, is coming from a place of like feeling powerless or not heard or whatever. I believe that like there is a process to which like we can understand that in this situation too. And that like if I believe in people transforming out of the situations that have caused them to commit violence or harm in one context, like I should believe that in another context too. And so I don't advocate prison for anyone. I don't feel like it's healthy for us as a society to think that that is a solution to our problems. And I don't believe that in any situation. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that that's where I'm at with that.
And I totally, I respect that position, and it's a dilemma for me. The last piece of it though is that I guess I'm taking this kind of historical, the historical arc of it, which, I mean, this is going to sound really kind of brutal, but I mean, okay, so politics, I guess it was Foucault who said politics is just war by another name. Okay, well, this country had a war, and the South was defeated. And the Civil War was about slavery, not states' rights. It was about states' rights to own slaves. And we didn't, I mean, when there's war, that's the difference between politics and war. It's not compromise. It's not about synthesizing two competing positions. It's not about bargaining. It's about a brute domination where one side wins and the other side loses. And I just see that there's this like thread between, we never punished the South for seceding, and then after losing the war, continuing to basically have all these institutions of slavery by their name. They never got punished. And so that's, I guess, the cost I see to not punishing again. And this is a little bit spiritual, but I guess I think that if we lived in a different kind of world, then it wouldn't be the case that we had to punish to get justice here. But this is that world because it's polluted by that original sin. And it might be that actually punishing these people and imprisoning them might change what we even think prison is, because it'd be doing it to different people than we've been doing it to. I mean, anyone who has a seriously mental ill person in their family, right, and can't get help, there's no institution in a sense, and mental hospital asylum deinstitutionalization was a good thing, because those total institutions were dehumanizing and thought of people as disposable. But what if we had institutions that actually like took care of people?
I definitely agree with that. I think that we should try and maybe we can talk about how UCSC, how we can use this institution in order to hold people accountable and hold our communities accountable
and care for them at the same time. Like,
yeah, maybe I think Morgan, you mentioned something. Sorry, I just want to make sure Morgan gets a chance to speak. I saw something in the chat. Could you speak upon that, using transformative justice in our communities?
I was not really prepared to share.
But sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I just wrote in the chat that like something I'm thinking about is like, when I think about transformative justice, I think about breaking down the systems that produce and give power to white supremacists. How we do that, I don't know, but yeah, that's just like something that I'm thinking about, like in the last discussion, they were talking about how part of transformative justice is like preparation so you don't need punishment. So I'm thinking about like, how can we break down the systems that produce the white supremacists that stormed the Capitol so that there doesn't need to be punishment? But I agree that we do live in a system where we have punishment. So yeah, just thoughts.
I think if I could jump in real quick, I think so I just like want to bring in like some of my experience, which is that like in prison, there are a lot of people who identify as white supremacists. And I think that like when I've been in community with those people, like outside of these ideologies, like I have come to understand that like many of those folks share a lot of the same experiences as people who are not white supremacists, right? Who are in prison. You know,
And some of them aren't even white.
True, right? You know, they have like historically felt like they weren't listened to, have, you know, felt powerless and disenfranchised. And I think that like even in the characterization of people like as white supremacists, like there's a flaw in that, right? In that like it, like in characterizing people in that way, like it individualizes like white supremacy and says that like these people are the worst people over here because of some ideology that they've somehow like um you know, latched onto, but that like the real white supremacy is like in like everyday kind of you know, like policies and the experiences of people like on, you know, with the state, right? And so like I think that that's like an important distinction to make, like in like what you were saying, Morgan, about like changing the conditions that like produce these types of ideologies. I think that that's like an important question. I mean, it's an important point, because like I feel like when I've been in community with those people, I understand that they want the same things, right? They want to feel valued. They want to feel like they're heard. They want to feel like they're a part of a broader community. They want to, you know, and that like when those folks like stormed the Capitol, like to me, I just felt like outside of the initial reaction of like what happened, I think like what I started to think about was that like this was a perfect like way for Biden to come into office. And I'm sorry if like I'm offending anyone, but it was a perfect way to kind of like segue from Trump to Biden. And when I talk about like the prison as like being kind of like reform as being a part of like that system, like an essential part of that system, like reform is an essential part of like all of our systems, right? Including like electoral politics and like the office of the president, right? Like it's important that like Biden has positioned himself like as like the not Trump and as like a change from that, right? And that Trump before that positioned himself as a change from Obama, right? And Obama before that as a change from the Bush years, right? And so like this quote unquote change is happening, but actually it's just a continuation of white supremacy. So yeah, I think those are my thoughts on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question in the chat from Karina who says, I think it's important to define what you mean by punishment. What sort of punishment and when do we draw the line and who gives those punishments? So I don't know if that's directed to anyone specific, but if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Well, the whole class that I'm teaching next quarter, The Power to Punish, is totally organized around the question, what is punishment? Why punish? How and who to punish? And we never arrive at a satisfactory answer, even just meditating on that question, for 10 weeks. But my own, I think a starting point is that punishment is pain. It's the infliction of some kind of pain or suffering. Now, what's the difference between violence and punishment? Well, I guess it's that one is legal. Punishment is just legal violence. That's all it is. And so then you can start to say, well, what's the difference between punishment and crime? Punishment is just a legal crime. So punishment is whatever we say we want it to be. And that's important to recognize, right?
Right. And yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think we have time for, well, Adamu, do you have any thoughts on that? Okay. I think we have time for probably one more question or comment. If anyone wants to jump in.
Maybe, I don't know if anyone else has some topics, but I really liked the discussion about like what is punishment and looking at transformative justice, because I'm new to the transformative justice kind of realm, but as I personally see it, and I agree that some people may disagree with me, but I don't believe in punishment. I believe that there is something that we can gain justice and equity without punishment. And I'm wondering if we can maybe discuss ways we've seen equity and justice within maybe the UCSC community, within our own communities, within our own like families, friendships, or dynamics, where we can try and find justice and equity without violence and without punishment. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
It's a great way to pose it, where you're like, instead of saying what is punishment and can we, we've all probably had the experience of like working something out without punishment.
Totally.
Great.
I think something huge about transformative justice is that it's always happening. We just never really knew it was there. And those, like, I think Adamu, you brought this up a lot, is like the acts of community care and what transformative justice really is at heart has been practiced a long time. We just didn't have a label for it. And I think I know for a fact it exists in the UCSC community. We just like don't kind of identify it as transformative justice. I don't know if anyone has any experiences. Oh, Adamu, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say too that like also like these things are like not like a completed body of works, right? It's also like things that are being developed and like developed in different communities, like to like developing different approaches like to different like I guess challenges, right? And so like I would just say like in kind of the organizing community that I'm a part of, like I also feel like, and like that Molly is a part of, and Christina too, that like I see those I see those things being practiced, right, in that community, right? And like that's a very like local thing that like I'm able to tap into like every day, right? Like I am in community with other organizers who like have relationships with each other, right? Personal relationships, right? And who like value accountability in those relationships, right? Who like are always kind of thinking about like their positionality in like organizing spaces, right? And trying to center like the voices of like formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated people and having them lead that organizing, right? Like I feel like these things are like really important to like the overall community and the work that we're doing, right? And so like, I think that these kind of like really like local situations that like that we're a part of, and like are just good ways to kind of practice that stuff, right? Because like in our practice, like we are like laying the foundation for like the world that we want to see, right? And like the practices that like we want to take into other spaces, or that we want to pass down to our kids or like our friends or whatever, you know? So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And thank you both for coming and speaking with us. This was such an awesome discussion. And
Thanks
I'm
for
sure
bringing
everyone...
us together too. Yeah.
God, yeah.
We hadn't met.
Oh, yay. I'm glad you guys got to meet. And I'm sure everyone has a lot of thoughts, but we're almost at our time. So I'll let you guys go. I do want to remind everyone that we have another webinar next week, next Wednesday at the same time. There's a link in the chat. And yeah, Mo, do you have anything to say?
Nope, that's it. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We hope to see you next Wednesday. Have a great rest of your week. And thank you very much to Adamu and Anjuli. I hope you also have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.